Hey there, welcome to Grief, the emotional shitstorm you never signed up for. Yep, I said it because grief can feel like that, a total emotional shitstorm. And I should know because I've been through it firsthand on multiple levels. It was how I felt when I was bullied on the playground for 6 years as a kid. It was how I felt when I went through 6 years of infertility treatment, feeling like a complete failure. It was how I felt when I held my 3-day-old son, twin to my daughter, and he died in my arms. And it's how I felt when my 14-year marriage crumbled and fell apart. And I walked out the door carrying the shards and shreds of my self worth with me. It was all I had left. And it was 100% an emotional shitstorm on steroids. I'm Margaret, a women's life empowerment and holistic grief coach. I'm a TEDx speaker and a 2 times #1 best-selling author. I'm also someone like you. I've been through all of it. I've been through the grief, and it's one big hailstorm of emotions. And I've been through it more than once, which I'm quite certain you have as well. And that's why I do what I do. I help professional women move beyond grief without guilt. And we all know guilt is one of the biggest emotions that comes along with grief. In fact, it's probably the most common. So I empower the most incredible women to reclaim themselves wholeheartedly so that they can confidently step into their next chapter full of freedom and joy and clarity. I tell you, it is probably one of the most beautiful things to witness. And I love what I do. So let's talk about grief. What is it? Well, spoiler alert, it isn't just death. Grief is an emotional reaction to any significant loss or change that you experience. And it can be really, really sneaky. It doesn't just knock on your door and say, hey, here I am. And it's wearing black and carrying a Kleenex box. Sometimes it can show up in really unexpected ways, like when you lose your job, or you're going through a divorce, or your best friend moves across the country, or you realize that your favorite coffee shop has permanently closed. Yes, that is a thing, and that does cause grief, especially for those of us who are coffee lovers. But grief, it isn't a one size fit all experience. It's a very unique journey that you go on your own. Even though you may be experiencing the same event with other people, your actual experience of grief is very unique to you. You bring all your life experiences with you. And that's how you filter your grief. It's how you feel it. So maybe you and your spouse are going through a loss of a child or a loss of a parent. You will both grieve, but you will be feeling it differently. That's something to remember. And grief comes with so many emotions. Like it's not just sadness, it is anger, it is guilt, it's relief, it's confusion, it's resentment, it's fear, it's shame, all the really good emotions. And sometimes, if you're like me, you can go through all of them in just an hour. It is awesome when that happens. So here's the thing. Grief is happening all around us, all around you, all the time. And everyone on this planet will experience grief at some point in their life in one way, shape, or form. It doesn't matter who you are. If you are human, you are going to experience grief. You can't avoid it. You can't dodge it. You can't hide from it. You can't crawl under a rock and pretend that you're not there. Trust me, I have tried, but grief is super stubborn and it will always, always find you. And it can come from so many different experiences that you go through in your lifetime. And this is where your grief load comes in, because the more grief you have experienced, the higher and heavier your grief load is that you carry. So losing a loved one is probably the most common that you hear about. You've lost a partner, a child, a parent, a grandparent, a friend, a colleague, a pet, a distant cousin 3 times removed. If they were someone that you felt love towards, if they were someone that you cared about, you will feel the grief with that loss. Maybe you're going through a divorce or the end of a relationship. There's grief around that as well. Maybe you suffered miscarriages or infertility struggles. There's a lot of grief around that. Maybe you feel this loss of identity and purpose and you feel like you're spinning in your life. Yep, there's grief with that too. And perhaps you're entering your empty nest syndrome. Your kids have gone off to college and moved out, and you were originally thinking, wow, this is going to be great. We're going to have the house to ourselves. And then you're sitting there looking across the table at a stranger because you and your spouse have lost connection and it's quiet in the house now. And there's not that energy that was there when your kids were home. There's a lot of grief around the empty nest syndrome. What about health challenges? Maybe you've been diagnosed with a terminal disease. Cancer is a big one, or Alzheimer's, and you're struggling to work through that. Well, there's a lot of grief with that, whether it's happening to you or you're caring for somebody who is going through it. And right now we're in a generation where there is a lot of adults caring for their parents and caring for their children. And there's a ton of grief around that too. Maybe you have financial struggles, bankruptcy, not being able to cover your mortgage, your investments tank. There's so much grief around that too, because it's a loss, it's a change. And it could even be the loss of your daily routines and the life as you know it. Think back to the pandemic 5 years ago. Within days, our entire life changed, our routines changed. And the fallout from the grief from the pandemic, we are still processing and probably will be processing for a very, very long time. It left its mark. The list of things that can cause grief can go on and on and on, is in the thousands, because grief doesn't discriminate. It doesn't matter who you are, where you live, what you do for a living, the color of your skin, whether you're a boy or a girl, or whatever, you have a career doing one thing or another. Grief does not care. It will come for you at any time. And like I mentioned before, if you're human, you're going to grieve. Now, here's the question. What's your grief load? You've listened to a lot of things up that I've just been spouting off, but what is your grief load? You might be thinking, I'm fine. I haven't had any big losses, Margaret. No worries. I'm good. I got this, girlfriend. No, grief is not just about the big stuff. It can pile up like laundry you have been avoiding. Small things just get added to the pile until one day you are buried under it and you're left wondering why you're feeling so overwhelmed. When we don't know what we're adding into our grief bank and what we're loading ourselves up with, we can't process it. We can't deal with it. We can't address it. And this unprocessed grief does not magically disappear. It sticks around. And if you don't pay attention to it or you look for it, it'll start showing up as perhaps exhaustion that you can't shake, or you're snapping at people over absolutely nothing. Guilty. I have done that. Maybe you're feeling off, but you don't know why. Maybe you're struggling with making decisions and feeling motivated. I know that was something that I struggled with a lot, feeling with the brain fog and like I couldn't really think straight. Or maybe you find yourself standing in front of the mirror, not recognizing who this stranger is looking back at you. Does any of this sound familiar? Yeah, that's grief doing a lot of sneaky work and it's trying to get your attention. So, how do you figure out how much grief that you're carrying? I've created a really simple tool called the grief assessment to help you identify what grief you might still be carrying that you're not even aware that you're holding on to. It's a free assessment. It's really easy to do. It takes about a minute to complete, and it might just open your eyes to what's been weighing you down. So the link to download it is in the description below. So go grab it now. It'll take you a minute to complete, and it's going to create so much awareness for you that you can then start healing and processing and trying to work through the emotions attached to all that grief. So I want to thank you for hanging out with me today on my very first episode of this important video series around grief. And if it has resonated with you, hit that like button, subscribe, and let me know in the comments what's something that you've realized you're grieving, but you hadn't thought about before. What light bulb's gone on for you? And remember, grief is a part of life, but it does not need to define your life. You're not alone in this shitstorm. I'm here for you. See you in the next episode.